Coming up, I really didn't want to talk about Boris Johnson in this week's video. I really didn't. But the issues that surround him are too important to ignore. I watched the Select Committee interrogation of Johnson on Wednesday, and although I personally thought it was a disaster for this greased piglet of politics, I doubt for a moment if any minds were actually changed on whether he's either A, God's gift to British politics, or B, a psychotic, amoral narcissist who honestly believes that it is churlish of us not to regard him as an exception, one who should be free of the network of obligation that binds everyone else. The words, of course, of his old housemaster at Eton. I'll personally plump for option B, but whichever option you feel more fitting, stay tuned to find out how this story is likely to unfold over the coming weeks. Wednesday's hearing was simply part of an inquiry into whether Johnson consciously misled Parliament. And although any normal person would find it absurd to even doubt that Johnson repeatedly lied to Parliament, as he has previously lied to all his former employers, lovers and supporters, still Camp Boris profess him to be innocent of all blame. And the taxpayer was forced to cough up north of £200,000 to provide Johnson with the best legal defence available. On the evidence of my own eyes, I think the taxpayer should demand a refund, as the defence statement delivered in Johnson's trademark "this posh accent means I'm intelligent" voice was at best flimsy and contained no new evidence whatsoever for the committee to consider.
The purpose of this inquiry is not to reopen so-called Partygate. It is to discover whether or not I lied to Parliament, wittingly misled colleagues and the country about what I knew and believed about those gatherings when I said that the rules and the guidance had been followed at number 10.
The boy who dreamed of one day being world king found the very idea of being challenged by the parliamentary minions on the Select Committee absolutely insufferable. This is a man who had managed to get through life lying and contradicting himself at every turn without ever being truly held to account. And here he was, having to suffer the indignity of forensic questioning with no opportunity to just bluster his way through a few sentences before walking off. Of course, he tried to make out like he was doing the committee a huge favour by pandering to their requests for his attention, and tried to peddle his usual line of patronising bullshit, distraction and blaming everyone other than himself. But on several occasions he let the act slip, and what we saw was an entitled, arrogant charlatan who was seething at being asked to explain himself.
When this inquiry was set up, I was completely confident that you would find nothing to show I knew or believed anything else, as indeed you have not. I was confident, not because there's been some kind of cover-up, I was confident because I knew that is what I believed.
Angry and tense under pressure to begin with, before channeling his inner Donald Trump and tapping into the victimhood that entitled, privileged white men from the moneyed classes always reach for when backed into a corner. Because, of course, in Boris Johnson's eyes, this is all the manifestation of a politically motivated witch hunt. He doesn't deserve this. It's not fair, he thinks, that his rule-breaking behaviour should be challenged.
I'm here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith and on the basis of what I honestly knew and believed at the time.
We're asked to accept that he, hand on heart, believed his advisers when they told him that all guidance and rules were followed. But Boris, we've all seen the photos where you were with multiple people, indoors and outdoors, drinking alcohol, no work being done, no social distancing, clearly taking the piss. You were there. You saw it yourself. You participated. How can you even begin to think it's possible to somehow pin this on your advisers? As Harriet Hammond, chair of the Select Committee, said,
"If I was going at 100 miles an hour and I saw the speedometer saying 100 miles an hour, it would be a bit odd, wouldn't it, if I said, somebody assured me that I wasn't, because it's what you've seen with your own eyes.
Especially when the advisers in question in Boris Johnson's case were not the cabinet secretary, not legal experts, not a personal private secretary or another top mandarin in the civil service. No, not them, but paid political appointees put in place by Johnson himself. SPADs, as they're known, PR people, media communications grunts. Q mainly just waffle from Johnson, trying to obfuscate and point fingers in all directions except at himself. The story of his life. Essentially vacuous, without morality, without an appreciation of the difference between truth and lies, honesty and deceit. These narcissists are kind of subhuman. They walk among us, and most of the time they look like us and sound like us. But there is something fundamentally lacking in their psyche. A lack of empathy, a lack of appreciation that they too are bound by the rules affecting everyone else, that they are some kind of special case. The famous Narcissist prayer by Dana Craig is almost a perfect fit for how Johnson handled the whole Partygate fiasco from the beginning. Let me remind you of the words. That didn't happen. All rules and guidance were followed at all times. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. I only stayed for 25 minutes. And if it was, that's not a big deal. They were necessary work events. And if it is, that's not my fault. My advisers didn't tell me that these social events broke the rules. And if it was, I didn't mean it. I was ambushed by a cake. And if I did, you deserved it. After all, everybody broke the rules. Narcissists hate to be challenged on their authority. And as well as the indignity of having to answer to the committee for his lies and transgressions, Johnson suffered the further indignity that same day of seeing his latest machinations to remove Prime Minister Rishi Sunak from the position that Johnson still covets fail miserably. Only 22 Tory MPs sided with Johnson to vote against Sunak's Brexit bill, far smaller than the numbers Johnson thought he could assemble to challenge Sunak. And those 22 were the bonkers fringe on the far right of the Tory party. People like Johnson himself, the maniac Truss, the self-embarrassing thicko Mark Francois, and the black-hearted slave-funded oligarch Richard Drax. This is concrete evidence that Johnson's influence and authority has ebbed away, that there is no Johnsonism like there is Trumpism. He's failed to retain control over this hard right-wing party, like his racist, sexist orange counterpart seems to have achieved across the Atlantic. And I fully expect that Johnson's authority will fall even further as the inquiry continues. By not obeying his own rules and providing an example to the British public, Johnson put lives in danger. As leader of the country, he ought to have erred on the side of strictness in interpreting the rules. After all, if the even more detached and privileged Queen could do so at the funeral of her own husband, and if so many millions of others of us so visibly and painfully followed all the rules, why couldn't he? But it genuinely still doesn't seem to have occurred to him that he's not a special case, that those leaving drinks were not strictly necessary, that Downing Street was not the only place where staff were working incredibly hard under difficult circumstances. Tory MP Bernard Jenkins' cross-examination of Johnson put the spotlight on this very issue and showed that even now, Johnson really doesn't get it.
Nobody raised with me or had any concern before I stood up on December the 1st about those events.
You did not ask.
I asked, I did say, this is complete nonsense. I mean, complete nonsense.
I'm actually hopeful that the committee will produce a unanimous conclusion that Johnson broke the rules in the way he blatantly misled Parliament on several occasions and acted way too slowly to correct his lies. After the smaller than expected rebellion against Sunak's Windsor Agreement, I now feel there's a good possibility that MPs may vote to suspend Johnson for 10 or more sitting days, which would, in all likelihood, trigger a recall petition in his Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency to demand a by-election. I do hope so. What a strange position the Tory party would be in. Assuming Boris Johnson would go through with contesting his own seat in a by-election, how would Conservative central headquarters handle it? Would Sunak approve funds from the Tory electoral war chest to put up a good fight against a really strong Labour candidate to get Johnson re-elected? Or would Sunak rather suffer the ignominy of the Tories losing this West London seat in order to shake the flea from the dog and rid Parliament of Johnson possibly forever? Up until the Johnson-led Windsor Agreement rebellion failed this week, Johnson probably believed that even if the Select Committee found against him, that most Tory MPs would find a way of sparing him a suspension long enough to trigger a by-election. But after the failed coup, and particularly after his performance in front of the committee this week, I think he must now be a lot less confident about that. It seems to me that Boris Johnson as a political force is now spent, along with the ludicrous Victorian-haunted pencil Jacob Rees-Mogg and the much-diminished European Research Group as a whole. Of course, these fringe weirdo allies of Johnson will continue to vocally stand by him. The Venn diagram of Johnson cult members and Brexit cult members has a near 100% overlap. But for more moderate Tory MPs, Johnson's performance at the Select Committee is an exasperating reminder of how things used to be under his premiership. His former press secretary, Will Walden, commented, "If he's convicted by his peers, it might just give the Tories the excuse they need to finally turn their backs on Boris Johnson. And as the Johnson era dies, then so will the concept of Brexit as a hot political issue. And we can then get on with the rational and objective process of undoing some of the massive damage that the Brexit cultists have done and continue to do to this country."
Welcome to the Brexit, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.